Hello, everyone. It's Ophelia, and today we're going to talk about how someone can use a memory palace today. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. So it's snowed on Memoria, and it will continue to have snow on the ground from now until the end of February. So I was thinking in our experience area, we're going to build a little coffee shop. And this inspiration comes from a Japanese artist, which I can't possibly pronounce her name, but I will leave the link to her little shop builds in the description below. And we'll just put Professor off to the side and we will start talking about our subject today. So today we want to talk about this book a little bit, Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. It's a research book and on using memory palaces in memory championships. And it highlights both the value and the deficits of memory palaces in memory work. And we need to spend a little time with this because we have a lot of ways to remember things now, including written materials and other memory techniques. So why would you use a memory palace today? That's going to be our subject. All right, so let's start looking at some slides. All right, so here is our book, Moonwalking with Einstein. And here we have a little blurb from the Amazon listing. It says, an instant bestseller that has now become a classic, Moonwalking with Einstein recounts Joshua Foer's year-long quest to improve his memory under the tutelage of top mental athletes. He draws on cutting-edge research, a surprising cultural history of remembering, and venerable tricks of the mentalist trades to transform our understanding of human memory. From the United States Memory Championship to deep within the author's own mind, this is an electrifying work of journalism that reminds us that in every way that matters, we are the sum of our memories. Well, I think we're a little bit more than the sum of our memories, but this is a very interesting book. It has a lot of good information in it. All right, so the pros, he points out that memory palace design and memory championships, they're fun. It was challenging. He had an average memory. He also did some tests with a researcher to see if his memory improved at all. He did find that it increased his short-term memory recall, the number of items that he could remember in a short period of time increased. He did recognize that it was mostly a party trick, though, in many ways that they were doing the memory championships. It wasn't very useful. He makes that pretty clear in the book. So here are the cons. Other methods of remembering. We have digital, printed, other mnemonic methods which work without a memory palace. And it did not increase working memory ability. Now that's different than our short-term recall. And we're going to talk about what that means next. The magic number 7, plus or minus 2. All right, this is the title of a paper. The magical number 7, plus or minus 2. Some limits on our capacity for processing information. Is one of the most highly cited papers in psychology. It was written by the cognitive psychologist George A. Miller of Harvard University's Department of Psychology and published in 1956 in Psychological Review. It is often interpreted to argue that the number of objects an average human can hold in short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2, so from 5 to 9. This has occasionally been referenced to as Miller's Law. And I got that out of Wikipedia, but it's in a number of the Memory Palace books that I've read. So including The Moonwalking with Einstein, or 9 Things. This is similar to something we previously were talking about in one of the earlier videos when I was talking about instruction and not teaching children more than 5 new subjects a day. Okay, so that's the bottom end of the magic number here. But we do have ways of expanding this number 7 with certain types of memory techniques. So one of those is called chunking. In cognitive psychology, chunking is a process by which small individual pieces of a set of information are bound together to create a meaningful whole in memory. The items are more easily remembered as a group than as the individual items themselves. The size of the chunk generally ranges from 2 to 6 items, but often differs based on language and culture. Okay, again, this comes from Wikipedia, and common examples of this are phone number chunking. Okay, so in the United States, we have an area code grouped as 3, and then the actual number. All right, so this is a 3 and 3 and 4. Our social security number is a 9-digit number, and it's grouped. The first group is 3, the second group is 2, and the third group is 4. And this helps us to remember more than 7 or any other number by grouping them together. We have other techniques too, but this is the one called chunking. And the reason why I'm talking about chunking and how to increase the short-term memory is that this is one of the things that memory palaces do. It can, if you have a lot of information that you've been gathering for a long time, as I have been for this particular memory palace, I can break up a great deal of information into smaller groups. And this can be done with an outline. But I think that this chunking is the reason why memory palaces were used in the past. What you do is you have a lot of information from many different sources and you want to regroup them. In the past, people studied original sources. And we'll talk about this again in a little bit. They did not have textbooks where information was aggregated and then they would have to memorize from one book. They read from many books, and when they saw information that fell together to create a new idea, they had to be able to recall this information, and they often didn't have written materials with which to do this with, so it had to be put in the memory, and so memory palaces were good for that. This does not answer our question for today. We could still do the same thing with an outline and a lot of pieces of paper. What does it do for us today? So this is what we're going to continue to explore. I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. This is a quote from Mark Twain. Many of us feel after we graduated from high school and college that there's something missing from our education. I know I felt that way, and I've spent many years trying to understand what that is for myself and for my children. I homeschooled my children, and I still felt, even when using older educational materials, that there was something not right about it. And so this is what I have been researching for quite a number of years now. So I've gathered all of that information, and this is why I'm using the Memory Palace to sort it all out and make some sense out of it. Education now is considered vocational knowledge rather than a focus on foundational knowledge. This means, how do we do something rather than what those things mean? Some people call this credentialism. It means we're kind of certified to do things rather than understanding what we do. All right. Another thing is that in the past, people studied under a mentor or a professor and referred to their education by listing these men rather than the university that they studied at. We don't do that now. We do it the other way around. We mention the university and sometimes mention the professors that we've had. The other thing is that students used to read from original sources in Greek, Latin, French, and German, rather than the textbooks that we have now in our own language. And they are textbook aggregations of knowledge rather than deep readings of a particular subject. All right. This is why you needed a mentor to guide you through this things that you were reading. Now you read a textbook and you learn what's in the textbook, regardless of the teacher that you have. All right. You could have that doesn't mean that you can have better teachers, but they tend to just focus on what's in the textbook, all right, rather than things outside the textbook, out of one book. And people used to read from many books. All right. In the past, philosophy was called the queen of sciences. And that means all the sciences started from philosophy. And when I went to school, philosophy was considered passé, it was surpassed by science, which is a ridiculous concept, but that's what we thought. That attitude is changing now, but it's very slow, and it may take some time before it reaches the general public or our culture. In our culture, very few people know even the basics of philosophy. Right. There's a reason why some of this happened. First, there was an explosion of knowledge and information from the industrial age through the digital age, and this was mostly because of the printing press. The printing press was invented many years before the industrial age started, but because information could be imparted to the general population, because technical knowledge increased dramatically in the 20th century, a priority on the study of parts over wholes increased. This is about the meaning. What is the big picture? That's what we feel that we're often missing. All right. Another reason is technical workers were needed after World War II. There was no time for extended studies. I mean, in the past, people would be in school 10 years, longer. So this is where the 4-year education began in earnest in many institutions, and followed by 2 to 6 years postgraduate work. But the 4-year education focused on technical learning rather than foundational knowledge again, and studies such as language studies, literature, and philosophy fell by the wayside in an effort to get the technical information that was needed covered in 4 years. Our theory of education changed over the same time period from a classical understanding of education, that is the study of humanity and how to know thyself, to this vocational training. And I do think that because much of this classical education that was missing, there began to be failures in vocational training. And so that led to behavioral training, so that you didn't get the big picture, an understanding of your job or where you fit into society began to fall away. And we were left with simply behavioral training, that is, how to fit in society no matter where you found yourself. And this is not working either. There's a lot of young people very unhappy about their lives and where they're leading. And I do believe it is a deficit of our education system. All right. Now, in the past, we've talked about convergent problems and divergent problems. Convergent problems have solutions that are specific. Divergent problems, as education is, do not have one solution or even several solutions. There are going to be many. It took a long time to get here. It's going to take a long time to get out of it. but there are things that we can look at to see why they happened the way that they did, and perhaps to begin to recover from the place that we are now. So I want to talk about this word foundational. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It means of relating to or forming or serving as a base or foundation, fundamental. I'm going to skip over this first example of the word because it's very specific. But the second one, property was, in a sense, foundational to culture, since English political economy rested on the private ownership of land, and the political economy in turn largely structured social relations. Now, we've talked a little bit about land and culture and how they're very much tied to each other. And it's true for all cultures, not just English culture. That's not, I mean, he's focusing specifically on English culture, but it is true for all cultures. And then this third one, philosophy is a foundational discipline. Not only does it do the spade work that makes the construction of other disciplines possible, it also pays constant attention to the foundations of those disciplines as they are practiced. That means you can hardly begin to study anything without having a solid philosophy in place, all right, and a discipline in that field. And this is very true, and it's often lacking from our educational system. So this is what I have been trying to look at in education. All right. So here's my definition of education. Education consists of culture, instruction, and experience leading to a love of wisdom, a sustainable vocation, and a desire to understand humanity's telos or purpose. So as I've explained in the past, culture, instruction, and experience are the tools of education, and the goals are a love of wisdom, that is how to lead a good life, a sustainable vocation, that means a vocation that you can work at, that feeds your family, and if possible, your soul too. It should not be something that destroys you. And a desire to understand humanity's telos or purpose. That's the big picture. The method I'm showing here is called Zettelkasten. It's a German method. It translates to slip box. This is a very good note-taking system. I'll include this video in the description below. This is an excellent video on how this works. It's not a method that I have been using, though I think I'm going to start incorporating it for these videos. I have already collected a great deal of materials on education. I've already been studying this for years and years and years. So, but I have found it difficult to organize this material using an outlining method. It just defies being outlined. So I have started using the Memory Palace design to organize material that I already have. And this is this distinction. The slip box method is very good for collecting notes from various sources. When I'm reading through longer works, longer books, I use a different system. I use an indexing system based on the bullet journal system. I found that's very helpful for me to keep all my notes from one source in the same place. The slip box method would not work for that. But many of us use many different methods to organize our material. These methods, the indexing method that I use and the slip box method, are very good for when you are doing the research for a subject that you're working on. And this is similar to the reading of original sources in the past. You're reading from many different works, and somehow you have to coalesce all of that material. And the Memory Palace is how that was done for many men of that age. And that is how I think it is still helpful today, because, as I said, this material that I'm working on has seemed to defy organization. I am finding, though, that physically putting that information together in specific areas is helping me to see where this information is flowing. When you're making lesson plans, this is what you are doing. You're breaking down a large amount of material into easily digestible sessions of information. And I'm finding that the memory castle or the memory palace system is helping me to do that. Now we're back to Moonwalking with Einstein. In this book, he talks about Peter of Ravenna, a leading 15th century Italian jurist who authored one of the era's most successful books on memory training. Titled Phoenix, it was translated into several languages and reprinted across all of Europe. All right, here's something about that. When the point of reading is, as it was for Peter of Ravenna, remembering, you approach a text very differently than most of us do today. Now we put a premium on reading quickly and widely, and that breeds a kind of superficiality in our reading and in what we seek to get out of books. You can't read a page a minute, the rate at which you're probably reading this book, and expect to remember what you read for any considerable length of time. If something is going to be made memorable, it has to be dwelled upon, repeated. In his essay, The First Steps Towards a History of Reading, Robert Darnton describes a switch from intensive to extensive reading that occurred as books began to proliferate. Until relatively recently, people read intensively, says Darnton. They had only a few books, the Bible, an almanac, a devotional work or two, and they read them over and over again, usually aloud and in groups, so that a narrow range of traditional literature became deeply impressed upon their consciousness. But after the printing press appeared around 1440, things began gradually to change. In the first century after Gutenberg, the number of books in existence increased 14-fold. It became possible for the first time for people without great wealth to have a small library in their own homes and a trove of easily consulted external memories close at hand. Today, we read books extensively, without much in the way of sustained focus, and with rare exceptions, we read each book only once. We value quantity of reading over quality of reading. We have no choice if we want to keep up with the broader culture. Even in the most highly specialized field, it can be a Sisyphean task to try to stay on top of the ever-growing mountain of words loosed upon the world each day. Few of us make any serious effort to remember what we read. And that's what I'm trying to say is when we are dealing with information that we want to retain, that we want to organize in a way in order, again, to see a bigger picture of what our life is about and what we need to understand. We need a more organized approach than we've been doing. And I think that memory palaces can help to restore that. So we're at the end of our little build here, and it's looking pretty good. Still need some improvement, and I've made some since I made this little video, and we'll see that in a little bit. So here we are once again back at the stone garden. Professor is intently reading a book, and you see that she's sporting a new hairstyle, and we've added some greenery to the stone garden, so it's going to turn into a kind of meditation garden or a reading area. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about the culture section as it pertains to how a memory palace is useful today. First, though, I do want to point out that I have added a new flag for Memoria. I chose the White Tree of Gondor. It's from the Lord of the Rings. It stands for stewardship, and I think that's an appropriate flag for this memory palace. It's also, I really like the design. And eventually I will gather all these custom designs and their creators into a document, and I will post that up probably on a Substack account. But I haven't gotten that far yet. All right, so if you watched the last video, these statues have been moved. I didn't like them by the ruined arch. That was just too much. So I put them over here. It works just as well for what they are going to be used for. They are the real and the fake winged victory statues, and one stands for taking the right path and one stands for taking the wrong path, which seems to be something people are very anxious about today. All right, you see I have also replaced the blossom lamp with the street lamp with banners, and the banner is the White Tree of Gondor. All right, so here's our ruined arch. Now, if you watched the last video, you saw that I had created 7 spaces and as a walking path to put things for a presentation. How land is important in the development of governments and states. We're going to go over a couple of those stations again. Not all of them, because that would take too long. It's a lot of material. But I wanted to show that memory palaces are more adaptable to the way our brain works than outlines or filing systems work. All right, so let's go look. All right. As before, the angled signpost is indicating that this is the first place. All right, and if you see, I have completed an icon sheet. I took pictures from the last video, and I have put them into a Word document with my icon list. And this will help me later on to recall what's here. And the reason why this will work is because even though there are many items on Animal Crossing and a lot of space to work in, it still gets a little cramped if you're trying to create an aesthetic. So I may have to clear out some spaces to put more things in. So then I have a record of the first layer of items if I want to superimpose more items in these places. So I can either restore them, or I can just use my own memory of where they are to find these things again. So let's talk about this first place. All right. Okay, so the first place has 4 things in it that are important. They are the bubbles, the tiki torch, the fountain to the right, and the food on the table. These are the survivalist list of needs. We can't live without 3 minutes of air, 3 hours without heat, 3 days without water, and about 3 weeks without food. This is a part of reality that we just can't get rid of. We need these things to survive. And if not just for ourselves, we need them for our families. And so that is why land is so important. We need land with clean air and clean water. We need access to food. If not on our land, then we need to have access to food from other lands nearby. And we need land to keep us warm and safe. So this is why land is so tied to culture and our customs. All right, so let's go on to the second place. Second place over here. Ooh, don't go too far. All right. Second place here is represents three types of governments, and they relate to three types of culture. One is authoritarian, another is tribal, that's the Stonehead, and the third is an individualistic type of culture where the individual has rights over the group. And it also stands for democracy. All right. So if I was going to give a presentation after I did the survivalist list, we would be talking about types of governments. And the reason for that is you need to lay the groundwork of why land is so important, that there must be a social structure in place if an area becomes so crowded that people have disputes over land. That's a long, that would be a very long lesson. All right. And we're not going to go through that today. That's for another video. And so we're going to move on to the third place. This has to do with states. The difference between a government and a state is basically that there's an agreed upon set of laws that everyone adheres to. All states are governments, but not all governments are states. Tribal governments are not considered states, although they can be very sophisticated. They are not generally not considered states because the different groups have their own rules and they come together to make decisions, sort of like the United Nations is supposed to be. You would not consider the United Nations as states, but states go to the United Nations to work out their differences. We're not going to talk about that today in any great detail because that is another very long lesson and it will take us astray from what I'm trying to accomplish here. All right, so this was our fourth place. Woo, get around here. All right. So here we see we have a little moss ball and a planter, a floating planter. And in front of this little bench is some gold bars. And this is to indicate that the value of land is important in developing a state. Where there is a lot of land and fewer people, hasn't been in the past the need to form a state. However, if some land becomes more valuable than other land, and many people want to be in or have control over the more valuable land, then a state forms. There'll be a state or there'll be a war over it. And that's what the sword stands for. Here, this is a vaulting pole, and I'm using it as a measuring stick because it stands for another idea involved with this, and that is if two nations go to war, it's going to be over land. Or if there's a civil war, it's over who controls the land. Sometimes it's very clear that the war is about land, and sometimes it's more hidden. If it's more hidden, then this is what the measuring stick is for. There has to be a ideal to fight for. This understanding about land and war is a very old one, and again, one I think that has been lost. Even our revolution was about land, and I will at some point talk about this in another video. Again, we're not here to talk about what's in our memory palace as much as to talk about how the memory palace is used. Now, you might think that this discussion would come before the talk about the governments and the different states, and that it's more tied to the first place. And that is true. It is tied to the first place about survival needs. All right. But that's the beauty of this, is that in the discussion of governments and how they develop and the differences between states, types of states, that we can go over here and discuss this, because this is something that is important to understand in the development of those things. But the reason why it's here is that even if I do talk about the differences land value, all right, in terms of money or whatever, it still would be in terms of what those governments and states are, number one. And number two, this would need to be repeated and emphasized again after the discussion of the governments and the states to make sure that it's all tied together. What I would want to show is that these are fundamental things to the development of government and states, and how disputes can be resolved before they break out into war, or if one goes to war, to have in place a solid understanding of why this is happening. You are asking people to sacrifice their lives for something. They should be doing it for something that is worthwhile. When we are trying to be persuasive, and you are trying to be persuasive when you're teaching, your brain is looking around for many different sources to develop an argument or to present material. And a memory palace can help you find those things because they are more organized. The things that are related to the subject that you're working on are gathered together and sorted out beforehand so that you can find them when you need them. And so you can see that this layout, this ability to move from section to section, is far more flexible and adaptable than an outline is, or a written textbook, or even a index filing system. And we'll go on to the end. Okay, so these 7 videos have covered the basics of memory palace design. And you should be able to get started with your own designs after watching these for sure. We've covered some of the major books that are available today on the subject. There are many more. In future videos, we will continue to use these Animal Crossing islands in order to work out the subject matter and see what other kinds of problems turn up in this kind of design. We will also cover other memory and organizing techniques and instruction methods that can be used in conjunction with memory palaces. So, but these 7 videos are the basics, and you should be able to create your own memory palaces, and wish you a lot of luck. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. And I hope that you continue with me on this journey in memory palace design techniques. Thank you very much. All right. That's all for now. See you next time.